A personal blood pressure and stroke data analysis, number 1578, VPT 114, March 20, 2026, Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation, category, blood pressure. Preface, when I suffered a hemorrhagic stroke near the Pontine region and was hospitalized. My primary neuroscience doctor told me that I was a chronic hypertension patient and that this was the reason for my stroke. After discharge, I returned to my primary physician's office and carefully reviewed all of my clinical records over the past 15 years. I found that I had never recorded a single blood pressure data point above 140 mmHg. This fact contradicts the label of chronic hypertension. On the day of my stroke in June 2025, my blood pressure BP reached 175 mmHg. This was not a long-term condition, but an acute event. This distinction is critical because it shifts problem from a static diagnosis to a dynamic failure. I am not presenting this to argue with my doctors. My purpose is simple and direct: to understand what actually happened inside my body and to prevent another stroke. Starting from the 2nd of August 2025, I began measuring my blood pressure 10 to 20 times per day, generating around 200 data points daily, on top of my 96 glucose data points each day. Thus far, I have collected approximately 46,000 BP data points after the 2nd of August 2025. My objective was not to improve the accuracy of an average value, but to capture transient spikes and unstable conditions that could lead to another acute event of stroke. Starting from December 26, 2025, I expanded my measurements to include both left and right upper arms and wrists using mmHg devices. Since the 2nd of August 2025, I have consistently measured both upper arm and wrist blood pressure, but only on my left side, using the same manufacturer's devices. I deliberately avoided switching devices because different devices may apply different internal conversion equations, which would introduce unnecessary uncertainty into my dataset. As a trained engineer with rich working experience in complex systems, such as nuclear submarines, space shuttles, nuclear power plants, I understand that all measurements contain different degrees of uncertainty. Therefore, maintaining consistent measurement conditions is essential for extracting meaningful signals. I would rather start with reliable devices than rely on stochastic probability methods to estimate accuracy afterward. After nearly 8 months of intensive data collection, I have built a high-resolution longitudinal dataset of my own post-stroke blood pressure behavior. I am now ready to analyze this dataset from a dynamic perspective. I sincerely hope that my findings can offer useful insights to other patients. Introduction. This study focuses entirely on my own biomedical system and its behavior over time. I am not attempting to generalize to a population or compare with statistical averages. My objective is to understand what is actually happening inside my body through direct measurement, consistency, and repeated observation. Traditional medical evaluation relies on a few isolated measurements from many different people. These snapshots may fall within a normal range but provide limited insight into deeper system behavioral. If one particular patient, a single value cannot reveal whether the system is stable or unstable, improving or deteriorating, or approaching failure. In contrast, my approach is based on continuous, high-frequency measurements collected under consistent conditions. This allows observation of patterns, transitions, and rates of change in nonlinear and dynamic systems. These characteristics are far more important than average values, even with a large population. After my stroke, I realized that the key issue was not simply elevated blood pressure, but sudden BP spikes and instability. Therefore, I structured my data collection to capture these transient events by measuring frequently. I built a time series dataset that reflects real system behavior under daily living conditions. Blood pressure is a complex biomedical feature that results from a combination of diet, exercise, sleep, stress or mood, daily routines, and environmental factors. Besides, blood pressures are also interacted with body weight, glucose, and lipids. Therefore, in this study, blood pressure is treated as an output signal of a complex system influenced by multiple inputs, instead of focusing on thresholds or guidelines. I analyze how this signal evolves over time, including baseline condition, accumulated load, and variability. This research is based on observation, consistency, and reproducibility within a single system. The goal is to detect risk early, prevent another acute event, and maintain long-term stability. Research methods. My data collection follows a consistent protocol designed to capture dynamic system behavior. The measurement period begins on the 2nd of August 2025 and extends to March 19, 2026. Covering nearly 8 months, during this period, I measure my blood pressure 10 to 20 times per day, generating approximately 200 data points daily. This high-frequency sampling captures not only values, but also transitions and transient spikes. To maintain consistency, I use devices from a single manufacturer throughout the study. I avoid switching devices to prevent systematic variability. Measurements are taken from both the upper arm and wrist, and starting from December 26, 2025, also include both left and right sides. The objective is not to improve average accuracy, but to capture system behavior, especially instability and transient overload, such as acute hypertension events. I also apply the viscoplastic medicine theory VMT and topological data analysis TDA to model blood pressure as a dynamic system from both physical and mathematical perspectives. The output strain is defined as the daily average systolic blood pressure SBP, representing the most critical factor associated with stroke risk. 3 input stressors are selected based on availability, repeatability, and physiological meaning. Steps: daily walking steps, representing circulation and mechanical activity, using 8,000 steps as the standard glucose FPG in early morning, representing metabolic stress. Particularly insulin resistance, using 90 mg (PL) as the standard blood pressure spike amplitude. Defined as highest SBP minus daily average SBP, representing acute overload. Using 13 mmHg as the standard. Within this structure, early morning BP represents baseline condition, daily average SBP represents accumulated load, spike amplitude represents instability and sudden stress. This framework separates chronic stresses, such as FPG and steps, from the acute stress of spike amplitude. By limiting the model to 3 stressors, I preserve clarity, reduce noise, and maintain strong cause-effect relationships. Analysis results from both normal mathematics and viscoplastopology. The VPT approach, normal mathematical approach. This study is built from direct observation of my own body. Through continuous BP measurements, several consistent patterns emerge. Upper arm versus wrist. Wrist systolic blood pressure SBP is consistently lower than upper arm measurements. Wrist average approximately 111, upper arm average approximately 115. 116 difference approximately 4 to 5 mmHg. This difference is stable and repeatable, indicating a systematic offset. If necessary, I would choose my upper arm. Short conclusion: upper arm measurements are used as the primary reference. Wrist measurements are used only for trend observation. Right versus left arm. Right arm SBP average approximately 117, left arm SBP average approximately 115, difference approximately 2 mm. Both sides follow nearly identical patterns over time, with the right side about 2 mm higher than the left side. Short conclusion: the system is balanced. One arm is selected for consistency. If necessary, I would choose my right upper arm. Early morning versus daily average. Wake up SBP average approximately 113.9. Daily average SBP approximately 115, difference approximately 1 mmHg. My morning SBP values are about 1 mmHg lower than my daily averaged SBP. DBP shows similar behavior. Wake up approximately 68.9, daily tilt 69.9, difference approximately 1 mmHg. Short conclusion: morning BP represents baseline condition, but my daily average reflects accumulated load from daily activities. If necessary, I would choose my daily average BP rather than morning alone. Most important finding: across all BP measurements, my blood pressure system shows stability, narrow range, smooth transitions, no large fluctuations. In a dynamic system, risk is driven by instability, not absolute level. However, a single acute hypertension event can still be devastating, as in my recent stroke. Traditional mathematical observations: average SBP shows a mild downward trend post-stroke, without a large magnitude change. Highest SBP remains elevated, creating a persistent gap versus average SBP approximately 10% or 12 to 13 mmHg. FPG shifts upward. Post-stroke approximately 10% to 11%, indicating increased metabolic load. Walking steps drop sharply approximately 50% after the stroke and only partially recover afterward. BP spike emerges clearly post-stroke approximately 13 mmHg, not observable pre-stroke due to single daily measurements. Key insight: average values alone do not explain system behavior. The gap and variability provide more meaningful biomedical signals. VMT results interpretation. VMT energy analysis shows a clear hierarchy of energy contributions by each stressor. Steps: 47% FPG, 27% SVP spikes, 26%. This indicates that physical activity is the dominant factor governing system stability. Although higher energy may sound negative, in VMT it represents magnitude of influence, not harm. On the stroke period, physical exhaustion led to a sharp reduction in daily steps, approximately 50%, representing amateur loss of system support. At the same time, metabolic balance of glucose was disturbed, with both FPG and RAG increasing by approximately 10%. Indicating increased internal stress, SVP spikes approximately 13 mmHg became measurable, revealing underlying instability. July 2025 is the pivot point. Before July 2025, cumulative energy remained below 15%. In July 2025, it abruptly increased to approximately 77%, marking a phase transition. Interpretation of system trajectory. 3D trajectory diagram represents the evolution of the biomedical system in a reduced state space defined by SVP, FPG, and steps. A clear geometric transition is observed at the pivot point of July 2025. Right after my stroke event. Prior to this point, the trajectory occupies a broader region with higher step values, indicating a stable system. At July 2025, the trajectory collapses into a compact region characterized by minimal steps and reduced spatial spread as shown in both 3D scattering diagram and 2D radar chart. This represents a loss of system dimensionality and functional capacity. Following this pivot, the trajectory expands again but along a different path, indicating partial recovery with altered system structure. This confirms that stroke is associated with an energy structural collapse as well as a geometry topological collapse rather than a gradual change. Conclusion: this study demonstrates that stroke is not a result of sustained high blood pressure alone, but a consequence of dynamic system instability. My long-term BP remained below 140 mmHg. Contradicting chronic hypertension classification, the stroke event was an acute failure associated with a transient spike. My post-stroke data shows steps decreased approximately 50%, FPG increased approximately 10%, BP spike approximately 13 mmHg. Changes occurred simultaneously. VMT analysis confirms that physical activity of walking steps is the dominant stabilizing factor. TDA confirms that July 2025 represents a structural collapse point, a pivot point on my energy curve. Final conclusions: instability, not level, drives risk. Loss of physical activity is the dominant phenomenon. Metabolic stress, FPG and SVP variability amplify risk. Stroke is a dynamic system failure. Final one-line summary: stroke is a dynamic system failure caused by instability and structural collapse, not simply elevated blood pressure. Epilogue: this study demonstrates that continuous monitoring of system stability can provide early warning signals before catastrophic events occur. Disclaimer: I write this paper not for fame, but to share what I have learned so others can understand their health, prevent disease, and live longer, healthier lives. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or published as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to T. He author, Gerald C. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C.